again a very, very interesting story because it probably dates back to the pagan origins of a festival celebrated around mid-March by the ancient pagan Romans. And this festival or ritual was called Lupercalia or Lupercalia, based on whether you're British or American. But in this ritual, what they recognized was that somewhere around mid-Feb was the start of the spring season, the mating season. So they would observe that the birds would mate around this time. They would see that flowers would, bloom around this time. And they celebrated it as a fertility ritual. But even there, if you look at the ritual itself, the records that exist of Lupercalia, they speak about how the men would strip naked and sacrifice a few goats and a dog, and then remove the hide of the sacrificed animal and use it as a whip to beat the women they met as they ran around the town. They would beat the women and the crops with this, assuming that this would improve fertility. So even if you look at it like that, unless someone thinks that whipping women was romantic, this was not really a romantic association, but more to do with fertility. But here's the interesting thing. There are some records, and very few, which say that a part of this festivity of Lupercalia was that the women in that region would put in their names in this big urn, and the men would lift out, pick one name randomly, and whosever name was picked, that man and that woman would be a couple for whatever duration. Strangely enough, the association with spring, the prominent association of it as a fertility ritual and fertility festival, and also this part of making room for procreation among humans as well. They have a lot of resemblance to some of the practices that many of our Vanavasi people have even today. So it is very likely, and many of our Indic scholars have also said that ancient pagan cultures across the world were influenced by our dharmic culture and dharmic civilization. So it is very likely that that association with spring and fertility, not the violent whipping of women, but the rest of it could have been influenced and inspired by what our own people were doing in recognition of this time. Now, Cupid, a lot of people would make the loose remark that, India has its own version of Cupid and Karma Dev is India's Cupid. But if you really look into it and think about it, Karma Dev is mentioned in texts as ancient as the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, and also in many of the Puranas. And it is a known thing that the Greeks borrowed much of their mythological stories from our Puranas. So it is more accurate, perhaps, to say that Cupid is the Roman version of the Indian Karma Dev. The piece that puts it all together, however, is that when Christianity was legalized, they tried to put an end to this festival called Lupercalia because it is a pagan ritual and no one can associate the church with promoting romantic love anyway. So on that grounds alone, we should wonder how come Feb 14th is associated with a saint and romantic idea. But when they tried to abolish Lupercalia, they were not successful because it was such a popular tradition among the locals there. And just as the church does even today, back then too, when they could not end something, what did they do? They Christianized it. So even in, if you see the churches in Kerala, I used to be surprised as to why we have a Dwajastamba in a church. Or why do we use camphor and an arati-like process in a church? Because that's what the church does. It Indianizes what it cannot end. And that's what they did back then. They Christianized Lupercalia, added the name of a saint, a person who then they made a saint. And that's why there's so much confusion around it. a fertility festival, the introduction of Cupid, and a saint who was martyred. But none of it was meant to be the version that it is today, which is about romantic love.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.